Okay, it's 2 o'clock and time to begin our special council meeting. Welcome anybody who might be watching online with us also. So I'm going to turn it right over to Josh Doty, who can present why we're here and some background.
Mayor, before we do that, we should do roll call so that we know those that
Yep,
are.
you're right. Let her rip.
All right. Cross. Holman.
Here.
Licio.
Here.
Tabit.
Here.
And Olson.
Here, thank you for that. Okay, now Josh.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This is a request for the Council's consideration of Resolution 2020-055 to consider approval of a temporary waiver of city code requirements to allow the Brainerd Family YMCA to locate at Camp Vanasek temporarily. In response to the governor's orders during the health pandemic, the YMCA has proposed to reduce their facility numbers, the numbers within facilities, by opening a second facility at Camp Vanasek. And the request is to reduce numbers and divide children between the YMCA in the city of Brainerd and Camp Vanasek in the city of Baxter. Just for a little background, of course, the council's already aware, but the YMCA did operate a children's camp at Camp Vanasek this summer. That was considered by the city staff as a continuation of the legally non-conforming use of Camp Vanasek being a summer camp. However, when the request came forward to proceed with the YMCA operating for a year-round daycare facility, staff did consider that a change in use, which triggers a number of different zoning requirements. However, at this time, because of the local state of emergency and the intent to reduce numbers by spreading the children and staff out amongst multiple facilities, staff is requesting that the council consider approval of the resolution that's in front of you. The resolution is tied to the peacetime emergency, and therefore it would only allow a temporary waiver of applicable city code requirements to allow the after-school childcare facility to locate at Camp Vanasek. So when that order is rescinded by the governor, that would mean that the temporary approval, if approved by the council here today, would be rescinded as well. And the Brainerd Family YMCA would have to either have previous zoning approval put in place as worked through the city, or would have to bring the children back to the YMCA in the city of Brainerd, or have a different option. One thing I would note for your consideration here this afternoon is that the approval, if the council moves forward with it, is subject to meeting all state and federal regulations. Specifically, one thing I wanted to talk about was the building and fire code. It is drafted as such in the draft resolution that they have to meet fire code and building code requirements. There has been discussions on what that would involve. Currently, the request is for the after-school program to be located in the primary two buildings at Camp Vanasek, the larger two buildings. And the primary improvement that's needed at this time that's been identified is a fire alarm system, which those discussions have been started in terms of investigation of what it would take to install that fire alarm system. I know the YMCA's architect is working on that and working on a proposal, and does not seem at this time that that would be of too much trouble for them to produce that fire alarm system in the two buildings. So of course, approval of the resolution would still be subject to the YMCA meeting local state building code and fire code. And with that, happy to answer any questions. The resolution is in your packet. It includes all of the conditions, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thanks, Josh. We'll look back to the Council, any comments or questions?
I have a comment. I think I love the idea of this. I've never been so excited to support something, knowing that daycare has always been a huge concern going way back, and I have so much respect for the YMCA. So I think it's outstanding that we can help. I'm just out of curiosity, how is it determined who will go to the Baxter site and who goes to the Brainerd site? Is it by choice, or do the Baxter families automatically go to the Y? Just curious.
That's a great question, and thank you for your support, and to all of you, and for allowing me to be here. I also want to just reach out and say thanks to Josh. By the end of last week, it really felt like we were working in a good direction, and I feel really good about working with him and you all as well, and having a presence in Baxter. As for your question, it's by school, home school. We've been talking with the school district about busing, and they agreed that they would bus children directly to the camp, to Camp Vanasek. It's not right. They're not going to drop off in that paved horseshoe, the drop-off loop. It's actually going to be down the end of the road just a little bit, and our staff will walk down there to pick them up and walk them back to camp. So it is by home school.
My home school, so Baxter Elementary kids would go to the site and got it.
And that's one of the safety protocols why we wanted to do this. Even here at the Brainerd Y facility, we've allocated different parts of the building so that kids are in groups of 10 or less, and that they're not co-mingling in between schools. So we didn't want them to be safe at school and then go somewhere else and intermingle with kids and kind of have a greater exposure.
Excellent.
Todd?
Your Honor, Council, the bus is like one example. I serve on the Tri-County Community Action Board as well. And so we worked through what I would call the normal conditional use permit process to establish a TCC action partnership school out on Meredith. And so most of us will remember that process, which dealt with every detail, including all of the code requirements, but parking requirements, school drop off, and all of those things are typically addressed through kind of a normal committee, commission, staff, applicant process. And that's for good reason. There are some aesthetic elements, but I think more importantly, there are code and health safety elements that are more important, especially for students, when we're working with vulnerable populations. This is not the same as making a COVID exemption for allowing outside seating at a restaurant to allow them to meet their capacity. That's adults, and that's a business in a commercial zone. Here we're talking about kids in school, staffing, and the requirements that are customary and expected. Quite frankly, I don't think parents really think about all of those things, nor should they. They would expect that the city or whoever the governing authority really is looking out for their children's well-being, and I take that role personally quite seriously. So we've done that daycare use both for a church and for the Tri-County Community Action. And this process is, I think, coming to us under a bit of a duress crisis kind of. But I think management at the Y saw this coming a lot sooner, at least in my observation of community conversation. And so for this to be thrust upon staff, who I think our staff have responded tremendously professional in trying to get answers and trying to make accommodations and trying to deal with the adaptations that are being requested. But I think, it's unfortunate that plans and actions by YMCA were not brought forward in a normal, timely manner that we could address it. The other thing for me personally, and again, as you've heard before, voice of one, I've been a zoning administrator in 2 counties, including Crow Wing County. I was in the community development role here in Baxter. And I have a long history of personal, professional application and enforcement of the codes. And And I think of all the places and times where we've not allowed occupancy based on not meeting codes, and usually driven by health safety related elements in the code, whether it's fire, ADA accessibility, or electrical, or any of the code packages that are there. And it historically has been my job, to not allow occupancy if those standards are not met and processes have not been completed to get to resolution where all of those codes are in fact met for the safety of the kids in this case. So I'm going to be taking a position. It would be profoundly inconsistent for me personally, and it would be profoundly inconsistent for the city, having done those daycare processes with other public entities or nonprofit entities like church and Tri-County Community Action, to make an exception for the YMCA. That isn't to say I'm not empathetic. I am. I read the paper. I understand certainly the COVID emergency that we've all been having to deal and cope with. But I think this planning actually preceded, knowledge of daycare use, probably even preceded COVID-19 protocols and the emergency awareness. So I'm just frustrated that we're at this place where the city is having to respond quickly and make exceptions to health safety codes when better planning, better administration, and better application processes could have occurred to allow our city staff, who've done great work all along the way in these kind of rushed days, to formally work through this. So the inconsistency of the city taking an action to kind of give a waiver, and me personally, I can't do it. So my action, or however the council votes, but my position will be opposed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Zach?
Just want to ask, I guess, first off, I don't see it as a conflict that's necessary to go any further than this, but I think it's fair just to note that my children are currently at the Y, so I have that relationship with that organization. Mr. Mayor and administrator or city attorney person, if you think that that's something that would preclude me from voting, please just let me know. But before I open that part up to anyone else, I guess I'm just curious, being Josh, that you brought this to us. I'm assuming, at least in the short term, under the COVID circumstances, you're comfortable with the safety aspects of this. If you could speak to what Mr. Holman brought up, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. Good question. The answer is yes. The alternate busing location that was mentioned here today, that's the first I'd heard of that. So we would want to take a look at that, especially if a bus is backing out into Oakwood Drive. That's news to me here today. But my understanding of what would occur during this COVID exception timeframe, so non-summer during the COVID exception timeframe, would be smaller numbers, 20 to 30 children that would come to the YMCA for an after-school, program. When looking at the site, there are a small number of parking spaces that are off-street with a paved loop. The off-street parking doesn't meet our paving standards, but at least there is parking there for those numbers. And if they use the loop and the parking there, that would address a lot of the safety concerns for those numbers for a temporary time frame. I would also add that we have been pursuing the building and fire code requirements very closely because, the city has never had an intent for those building and fire codes not to be met. And I think an evaluation of the facilities has determined that the facilities are fairly equipped for the use. So when it comes to building codes and fire codes and all of those safety aspects of the building, it looks like they're basically real close to having what they need to have a safe building environment in the two named buildings for the use. So yes, I would note Councilmember Holman's concerns and agree that they are valid. But from a temporary basis, I guess staff approached it as nothing is jumping off the page, so to speak, to be a significant safety concern for a temporary basis. Now, with that, recognizing that if the after-school program is proposed in any more permanent fashion that goes beyond COVID, there's more work to be done to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. So this affords some time and some exception to reduce those staff and children numbers down. But I don't have any overwhelming safety concerns at this time, with the exception of evaluating the new information learned here today about where the buses are going to pull in.
Okay. Anybody else? Mark?
Yeah, well, I'll throw my 2 cents worth in here. I have been involved with Camp Vanasek for probably close to 30 years as part of the Lions Club. Lions, when I came to town, sponsored the camp, worked at the camp, kept the camp running, and still Lions members serve on the board of directors of Camp Vanasek LLC. So there's, hopefully that's not a conflict. I guess I'm a little concerned that we're even here in the first place. Something that bothers me is that we had a camp running, and when I say we, Camp Vanasek had a camp running, and there were 100 kids there this summer. And at this point, because now it's not a summer camp anymore, it's going to year round, we're being told that it's an increase in the use, expansion of the use. And I have a hard time with that, because both those buildings were built as year-round buildings. They have been used consistently for meetings through the winter since they were built. They're heated, insulated, they were built to the codes, they were built to the ADA at the time they were built. Obviously they were built in our city and they had a building permit. And all that shouldn't be a question. So we're here now because of the words that got used in a letter, childcare. Is it childcare, or is it a continuation of the summer camp that were under the rules of the American Camping Association? So I guess I can be equally indignant that we are here today because of the situation and how it came to be. I don't see an issue as long as we meet the provisions of the code, fire code, and the building codes, which, you know, I'm confident in being in that building. And you know, the Y has already said they will bring that up to code, whatever the city's required. So that's my 2 cents worth at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? We got everybody. I would just add that basically I agree with Mr. Holman. I was here for those other two applications, and we maintained our standards, our ordinances, and other than COVID, there's not a lot of difference here in what we're going to change our philosophy about for. And so I do have a problem with that. I do have a problem with the fact that if we go back in time and look at the correspondence that took place here with the dates of the correspondence with the staff, that this never had to be an 11th hour crisis, because there are dates that will show that this is not a new subject. But through ignoring or disagreeing or whatever, now we are here today. And that's very unfortunate. And what's unfortunate is that the parents, in my opinion, voice of one, the parents are the potential losers here, because they enrolled their kids thinking that the administration of the YMCA had everything under control and everything was agreed to. They knew what they were talking about, and it was a done deal. And so I feel bad for those people. Now, because of that, I find myself forced to probably go along with this for the time being. The kicker here is that if the governor changes courses by the end of this week, to me, this all goes away and we start all over. And the discussion gets probably more technical and a little bit more debated, and certainly more fact-finding would be involved in that. But I'm not going to borrow trouble for tomorrow, but that's on the horizon, that there's still more to come, even after we move forward today. And again, I feel like to a certain extent I'm turning my back on my own principles or ideas here. But again, I think it's for the short term and for the expectations of the parents that have made commitments and are ready to go. And I would dare say, in disagreement here, that the average parent would say this is daycare, because that's what it is to them. It's not a camp, it's daycare, because that's what, and I have no right to make that assumption, but if I were one of those parents, that certainly would be how I would be looking at it. So if anybody's got anything else to add, otherwise I'll look for a motion here, I guess.
I would just ask quickly if, Josh, is there anything else that we need to be aware of or discuss regarding any of the information that came out here? I don't know if the designation between childcare and camp is a meaningful discussion or not.
Well, the resolution gives temporary waiver of basically those determinations on how you consider the use. And that will have to come up at a later date, because those, to have permanent zoning approval, at staff's position at this point is that it is a daycare, and that requires zoning approval. And so for a permanent approval of an after-school program, staff's position is that they would have to come back through a process to gain city approval for that new use. And so I think that discussion will be more for that time frame at a later meeting. I think the resolution allows the temporary approval. I would say that with that resolution, the condition provides the expectation that they meet building and fire codes before operating. And that work is underway. So I think the resolution pretty much categorizes what needs to be categorized for an approval during the COVID-19 health pandemic. But noted that for permanent approval, more discussion and or applications from a zoning perspective would be needed in the future for it to become permanent.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Look for a motion then.
I'll make a motion to pass the resolution as currently written and stated, with possibility of revisiting.
Okay, motion by Licio,
Second.
second by Talbot. Any further discussion? Roll call. You're still muted there.
Sorry about that. Cross,
Yes.
Holman,
Opposed?
Licio,
Yes.
Tabit,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes. Is there any other business to come before us here today, Administrator?
There is no other business.
Okay, look for a motion to adjourn. Motion by Holman, Motion by Licio. All in favor, I guess roll call.
Cross,
Yes.
Holman,
Yes.
Licio,
Yes.
Tabit,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.